Okay, guys, welcome to our first online presentation. As I stated in the introduction video, our first presentation is going to be on George Washington and kind of his presidency and the early republic. So we're kind of going to see, after the Constitution was created, what does the presidency actually look like? Because remember, this has never been done before. This is the first time we've ever going to have a president, or basically a democracy as we know it on such a large scale. So it's kind of interesting for most people around the world and Americans to see how this was actually going to work. So let's kind of go through some of the stuff we want to know at the end of it. So here's your essential questions for today, guys. Number one is a pretty simple one to get us started. Some of you may already know it. The question is, what is the presidential cabinet? So what is the cabinet when we're talking about the presidency? The second question is, what precedents did George Washington create? Okay, name two of them. All right, and a precedent is something that he does that every other president after him does for no reason at all besides the fact that George Washington did it. It's the precedent. Okay, there's a lot of precedents that happen in court cases and so on and so forth. But we'll get to that with our presentation. And the third thing is, can you predict which two members of Washington's cabinet will become hated rivals? So at the end of this presentation, you should already have a good idea of which two individuals that are a part of Washington's cabinet that are going to become rivals in the years after. And for example, week 2 and week 3, we'll talk about these two guys at length. Okay, so that's what we're looking for today during the presentation. So again, some discussion questions if you kind of want to think about it in your head is, what does the President of the United States actually do? Think about roles, think about constitutional duties, actions, and historical examples. Again, these are just more for you to kind of internally reflect on as we kind of go through it at the end. So let's get into the background here. So the Constitution takes effect in 1788. That's when it was ratified. With that, George Washington becomes the very first president of the United States. He basically had to invent the presidency while in office. No one really knew what the president could do, couldn't do, shouldn't do, should do. All right, so Washington is kind of going to be the trendsetter. Okay, that's what we're talking about with the precedent. He's going to basically make up the rules on the fly, and other presidents after him kind of just followed those rules for no reason at all besides the fact that Washington did it, I'm going to do it. Okay, so that's one of the interesting things. That's what we're going to spend this PowerPoint just kind of looking at what Washington did. Okay, because again, he kind of invented the role of the president. So let's go to the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, we're going to skip through this, guys. We talked about it in our last unit. We just know that it was split Federalists, Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalists wanted the Bill of Rights. Federalists did not want the Bill of Rights. But as we know, the Bill of Rights was added. Okay. So political precedents. Here we go, guys. Ooh, gave away the meme spoiler there. So the first things first, okay, with political precedents. At this moment, there are literally no political parties in the country. Political parties do not exist. And to kind of piggyback off that, most people even dislike the idea of having political parties. Okay? They thought it would be dumb for people to vote along party lines instead of choosing an individual candidate that they liked. So, like, for example, today, a lot of people, when they go vote, they don't even know the candidate at all. They're just checking the box of their political party or their political affiliation, okay? Where the people during this time thought that was going to be a bad idea. They thought it would be better if there was no political parties and we would focus on the individuals more and less about what political party they're associated with. Okay, obviously it didn't turn out that way. Okay. Still getting distracted here. All right, so one of the biggest precedents that Washington starts is that he creates a cabinet. Okay, now your cabinet is basically just your political advisors. All right, so if you want to jot that down for the essential question, this will help us with essential question number 2. Number 1. So a political cabinet, or Washington's cabinet, is literally just his advisors. Okay, don't know why they called it a cabinet. They did. All right, but we want to know that it's his advisors. Okay, kind of his tools that he will call on, or his advisors that he'll call on to help him out with specific things. So, for example, Thomas Jefferson, who we know, becomes the Secretary of State. And another leading figure of the time is Alexander Hamilton, and he's going to become the Secretary of the Treasury. Okay, so those are just two members of his cabinet. Okay, and again, there you got it, scumbag Washington. He opposed the idea of political parties, but he also did not have an introduction of what he's going to say, or did not have a better idea. So let's look at some other ones. Some of the big ones that you guys want to kind of take away is that George Washington started the idea of being called Mr. President. Okay, being called Mr. President is common now, but that was just under a list of names that people could potentially have called him or did call him at the beginning of his presidency, like Your Highness, Protector of their liberties, the Electoral Highness, Your Excellence, Your Majesty. All these were ideas that people came up with to what to call the president when you formally introduce yourself. And as we know, Mr. President is the one that won out. Okay, so that's another precedent that he starts. You know, what do they refer to you as? Okay, Mr. President. Now, the most important precedent or trend that Washington started was the stepping down after 2 terms. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but it's the stepping down of 2 terms is the big one. Okay, right there. All right, so that's what we're looking for. All right, so stepping down after 2 terms is something that Washington did not have to do, but he did it anyways. Okay, and from Washington all the way onward, up until basically World War II, every single president just stepped down after 2 terms. Basically, 1 term is 4 years, so you have 1 term, 4 years. That if you wanted to, you could do another term, so another 4 years. So now we're sitting at 8. And then after 8 years, then you just willingly step down and let the next person take over. There was no law. There was no rule for him to do so. Washington just basically didn't really like being president. He kind of thought it was a burden. And so when he stepped down, it allowed for someone else to kind of fill his void. And that continued on until World War II, where we get one specific president who just kind of continued on, 2 terms, 3 terms. And then Congress stepped in and made a law that it's only 2-term limit. Okay? But, so those are some precedents, right? Creating a cabinet, right? Your advisors. What are they going to call you? Okay, call me Mr. President. And probably the most important one is stepping down after 2 terms. Okay, all these are new. And again, he's creating these precedences, these trends that every president is going to do moving forward. All right, and again, like I said, the precedent of stepping down after 2 terms is kind of a precedent or a trend that you don't have to do until we get this 22nd Amendment during World War II times. All right, let's move on to the Whiskey Rebellion. Now, one of the problems with the Articles of Confederation, guys, was that it couldn't stop Shays' Rebellion, if we remember that, right, with Daniel Shay. Well, now, with the Constitution in effect, the central government has a little more power. The national government has a little more power. And so we get kind of the same exact story, but instead of farmers who are upset now we have distillers, okay, people who make whiskey, right? That's why it's called the Whiskey Rebellion. So when a tax is added to their beverages that's going to make them go bankrupt, they protest, and sometimes it gets really violent, especially in the West. So Washington now nationalizes a local militia. Basically, he takes local militias and turns them into the United States Army. And he goes out and he puts down the Whiskey Rebellion without any bloodshed. And this is the big aha moment for most Americans, that it showed the strength of the national government, where before, with Shays' Rebellion, the national government couldn't do anything. Okay, they had to wait until state militias went and put him down. Where now we've thrown out the Articles, we got the Constitution, we got the presidency, and the first test is literally the same exact example. But now, thanks to the new powers that are granted via the Constitution, it's a big success. Okay, they put it down, no bloodshed. People know that we're moving in the right direction. All right. Foreign policy, Washington was big on making sure that we don't get entangled into foreign affairs. He didn't want to mess around with any wars in Europe. We get this thing called Jay's Treaty, where it's basically us, Britain, and France. And France and Britain are not on good terms right now. Obviously, we're not with good terms in Britain, but we kind of backstabbed France by agreeing to this Jay's Treaty here, as you guys can see. We agreed to Jay's Treaty, which basically links us with Britain again, trading-wise, which upsets France. So France eventually is going to sever ties with us, and this is kind of the beginning of us and England hopefully becoming friends again, but at the expense of France not liking us anymore. Okay, so kind of some things going on there. You can kind of read the quote there. Most Americans were not too happy about Jay's treaty. Basically, the anti-federalists were really upset about it, and the federalists were pumped about it because they could trade more, make more money. Okay, so it all comes down to money again, just like we always talk about. Socially speaking, we get Republican motherhood, which is the idea that it's a mother's duty to teach their children Republican virtues such as selflessness, integrity. Republican motherhood plays a big role in the household. It also plays a big role from women moving forward. The first good thing that comes out of it is women get a political role in society for the first time. It increased the education for women because you have to know it to teach it. Okay. Some bad things also come out of Republican motherhood. For example, you have all this great responsibility with little rights. For example, like legally speaking, women have very limited rights right now, but they have such a great responsibility of teaching the next generation what it is to live in a republic. Okay, and obviously this linked women to home. Okay, and that becomes a big deal all the way up until women's suffrage in the 1920s. Okay. So those things, economically speaking, Washington's most important decision was to literally pick the two opposite sides of the spectrum as his advisors. You have the Federalist Hamilton and you have the anti-Federalist Jefferson, two brilliant guys who see the world very differently. And that's what Washington wanted. Okay? He didn't want to have everyone who thought the same. He wanted to have opposing viewpoints in his advisory, in his cabinet, so they could give him, basically, he could get a full look at the problem and get two different ways of solutions. Okay? And again, what kind of economy would the United States want to create to support our new nation? You have the anti-Federalist Jefferson, who wanted more of a farming, agricultural society. And then you had the Federalist Hamilton, who obviously wanted more big business. Okay, less farming, more mercantism, as you can take a look here. So take a look through here. You can kind of get an idea of what Hamilton wanted it to be. And the opposite side of the coin is literally Jefferson's point of view. Okay? We got 3 minutes left here before my time runs up. I'm only on a 15-minute timer for myself because, again, it helps me get to the critical stuff and doesn't waste your guys' time. But at the same time, it does kind of feel like I'm going fast, so let me know what you guys think about that. Shoot me an email if it's way too fast for you. So the essential question review today. Number one is, what is the presidential cabinet? And like we said, that's just his advisors, okay? And there's more than two, all right? He has a few different men working with him to kind of advise him and give him input. What precedents did George Washington create? Name two of them. Well, we got a few, right? What they call the president, Mr. President, leaving after 2 terms, and creating a cabinet. All right. And can you predict which 2 members of Washington cabinets will become hated rivals? Obviously, it's going to become Thomas Jefferson, the anti-federalist, and Alexander Hamilton, the federalist. These guys are going to duke it out even longer. After Washington's presidency, into Adams' presidency, and then into Thomas and Jefferson's presidency, these 2 guys are going to become hated rivals, and they're going to, because they're on totally opposite ends of the spectrum, it just kind of seems natural that they're going to want to fight it out politically, ideologically, but also actually duke it out, and we'll get to that story next week. But that's all I have for you guys. This is the presentation this week. Other weeks there'll be more than one. Okay, but I figured week 1 we'll just start off with the solo presentation here on Washington's presidency to get you guys kind of accustomed to it and kind of what it looks like, and also good practice for me. Okay, I've never done this before, so I'm on the same boat as you guys. Shoot me an email if you guys have any input on the presentations, if it went good, if it went bad, if it sucked, let me know. I can obviously change things, but for right now, good luck, guys. Stay home, stay safe. And I will talk to you guys later.